Last week, the White House expressed unhappiness with what it called Israel's unfortunate strike on Hamas in Qatar, a key U.S. ally in the Gulf. Today, all frustration seemed forgotten as U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, downplaying the unilateral attack that sent the region reeling. Unity, no matter what. The visit comes as the leaders of dozens of Arab and Muslim countries meet in Doha to condemn Israel, and as a number of Western governments prepare to recognize Palestinian statehood at the United Nations General Assembly. With airstrikes intensifying in Gaza, Washington's support for Israel faces growing scrutiny abroad. We start tonight in Jerusalem. The trip was planned well in advance, but current events gave Marco Rubio's visit to Israel a different kind of weight. He met Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as his army presses ahead with controversial operations to seize Gaza City. Netanyahu called Rubio's visit a clear signal that America stands with Israel in the face of mounting criticism. In fact, he said their alliance has never been stronger. The meeting comes less than a week after a deadly Israeli strike on Hamas members in the Qatari capital derailed international efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. The attack shocked the region and annoyed the U.S. But today, Rubio's message was clear. The U.S. has Israel's back, and only the release of hostages and the elimination of Hamas will end the fighting.
All 48 of those hostages, both living and deceased, need to be home. They need to be returned. They never should have been taken. What happened on October 7th was an act of unparalleled barbarism, and what's happened since then have been repeated acts of unparalleled barbarism on the part of Hamas. Hamas needs to cease to exist as an armed element that can threaten the peace and security of the region, and the people of Gaza deserve a better future, but that better future cannot begin until Hamas is eliminated. That better future and that kind of peace is not even possible until the hostages are released, all of them, every single one. And so that's what we continue to be focused on. That's what the president wants to see happen, and that's what you can count on our unwavering support and commitment.
Mairav Zonszein is a senior analyst on Israel at the International Crisis Group think tank and joins me now. Mairav, welcome back to DW. Now, the Trump administration wasn't happy at all about the Israeli attack on Doha. Trump's patience with Israel's war in Gaza is stretched thin, but now his Secretary of State is in Jerusalem offering unwavering support to Israel. Does Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have a completely free hand here?
I mean, so far he does. Since Trump has come into office, he's talked about peace, he's talked about ending the war, but so far he has aided and abetted everything that Israel has done in Gaza. Israel has killed thousands of people in Gaza in the last few months. It has used starvation as a weapon of war. At this point, I really think that it's hard to see any daylight between the U.S. and Israel on the Gaza issue if we focus on actions and on what's actually happening on the ground, not on the rhetoric, which continues to be kind of, that they're going to end the war. But that is not what's happening on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Do you think discussions behind closed doors will be as harmonious as what we've seen in front of TV cameras today?
I mean, I want to say that I'm hoping that there will be more consternation, more condemnation and action taken by the U.S. administration, but I have to say that I don't expect that to happen. Certainly outwardly, they're going to show a united front. The question is, what is Trump's strategy, if at all, on the Israeli campaign in Gaza? He's talked about a Gaza Riviera. He's talked about voluntary immigration, very much the same policies that Israel is trying to enact now. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to see that there's going to be a difference. The one thing that I'm assuming is going to happen is that Rubio is telling Israel it can never bomb in Doha in Qatar again. But we heard Netanyahu today in his statement with Rubio saying that they will attack wherever and whenever to take out Hamas leaders. And he said that with Rubio sitting or standing right next to him. So at this point, again, I think we need to really wait and see if any, serious concrete action is taken. I think ultimately, if Trump wants to end the war in Gaza, he can do so. He can put the stop on Netanyahu, and he has chosen thus far not to do that.
Yeah, I want to take a closer look at some more of what Marco Rubio said there in Jerusalem today. He said the only way to end this conflict is through the elimination of Hamas, and he resoundingly rejected the recognition of Palestinian statehood, saying that it was only emboldening Hamas. Now, we've seen several countries move towards that recognition, and we're going to see even more of that at the General Assembly of the United Nations. Give us your read on Rubio's messaging there today.
Well, Rubio's messaging is very much aligned with Israel's messaging. Again, they're very much united, very much synonymous. When he talks about the elimination of Hamas, nobody really understands what that means. If you ask Israeli security military officials, they'll tell you that Israel achieved what it needed to achieve against Hamas months ago by debilitating its military wing. It can no longer pose an immediate threat to Israel. So it's not really clear what he means elimination of Hamas. Everybody understands that Hamas is a political movement and is something ingrained in Palestinian society is not going to disappear, certainly not after 2 years of war. In terms of the recognition issue, again, Israel is against a two-state solution. It's against Palestinian self-determination, Palestinian rights to self-determination and to basic human rights. And the U.S. is in on that with Israel. It's the notion that supporting Palestinian statehood is somehow propping up Hamas. It's the opposite. Hamas has actually been able to, I'm looking for the word and I can't find it, flourish. Hamas has flourished and has worked off of, and extremists in Israel have as well. They have been against a negotiated process. They have been against a two-state solution. So it's actually the radicals that enjoy the constant war and the lack of any kind of resolution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. So, I think many experts on this issue who have been working for peace for years would tell you that even though recognition by, Britain and France and others is a step in the right direction, it's not nearly enough, but it has nothing to do with strengthening Hamas. That's just a spin by Rubio and by Israel.
Yeah. Rubio did sound, if we look at the rhetoric and how it's evolved over the past weeks and months, he did sound a lot more pessimistic in terms of a negotiated solution to this conflict. They were always among those who pushed for the discussions to continue. Today, we heard him that the only way to end this war is by destroying Hamas. Does that mean the U.S. doesn't believe in a diplomatic solution anymore?
I mean, Israel just bombed the negotiating team that were sitting in a non-state NATO ally of the U.S. to discuss a ceasefire and hostage deal, and Israel bombed them. And so clearly, and the U.S. has done very little except for one or two statements that it doesn't serve, their interests to do anything about it. And so Israel will continue to act with impunity, and the U.S. can continue to talk about wanting peace or wanting a ceasefire or wanting the hostages back. But as long as it doesn't stop what Israel's doing, it's just not going to happen. I mean, even the families of the hostages who have been fighting this government for months to get a ceasefire deal for years now, even they believe that Netanyahu did this to derail the negotiations towards a ceasefire. So I believe that what Rubio is saying today is more in line with what is actually the Trump's approach, which is that I'm going to talk like I want an end to the war, but I'm not actually going to do anything necessary to get there.
Marco Rubio is heading to Qatar later in the week. How do you expect the U.S. to balance their relationship with Israel and their partnership with Qatar going forward?
Yeah, well, basically the whole region of the Middle East and the Muslim countries, Arab countries are all together in Doha today. It's very weird optics to have Rubio here in Israel while the Arab world is discussing how to create a united front against Israeli aggression, and then for Rubio to show up in Doha tomorrow. I imagine it's not easy for him, and I imagine he's telling Israel kind of things that it wants to hear while he's here, and then he'll tell Doha what it wants to hear, which is that it will protect Doha against further Israeli strikes. But again, without concrete action, these will just be words. But I imagine Rubio is going to try to basically say the right things to both sides. And the real question is whether behind closed doors, something is actually, in terms of action, going to manifest itself. So far, we have no idea if that's going to happen.
This is Mairav Zonszein of the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
To discuss this further, I'm joined by Ahmed Fouad, Alkhatib, a resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. Great to see you. Marco Rubio promised unwavering support to Israel, as we just heard, and is backing its aim to eliminate Hamas. What does that stance mean for Israel's military actions, not just in Gaza, but the whole region?
Well, I think it's to be expected that Secretary Rubio would express such sentiments, at least publicly. What I'm picking up the chatter here in Washington is that there's actually frustration behind the scenes that maybe doesn't amount to the U.S. Ceasing its support or stopping its support for the war, but is asking the Israeli leadership about the end game, is asking the Israeli leadership to reconcile its differences with the military brass. We've seen reporting on the IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, expressing almost publicly his displeasure with the decision to invade Gaza City, calling it a quagmire, wondering what is the military, strategic, and tactical value of that. So I expect that Secretary Rubio had discussions about that behind closed doors, despite the public and diplomatic posturing. But more importantly, I also expect that he conveyed displeasure with the fact that not only did the operation in Doha fail to take out Hamas's senior leadership, but this has gravely complicated the United States' posture in Qatar vis-a-vis the Al Udeid air base and the military cooperation when it comes to the Saudi and Emirati positions and trying to entrench the Abraham Accords and expand them. And it has really complicated what the United States is trying to achieve in the region by this failed airstrike.
Yep. Rubio will head to Qatar directly after an Arab Islamic summit calling for Israel to be punished. How does the US manage unwavering support of Israel and the upkeep, as you point out, of the key strategic relationship like Qatar? Can they have both in the long run?
Well, I think quite frankly, I think the Qataris are facing an existential crisis of a sort. They've pinned their national security doctrine on the presence of the United States Armed Forces. This has been for the case for decades, with the Al Udeid air base, with the presence of various assets of the intelligence community, but also with Qatar playing a mediating role in messy conflicts in the region where the United States may lack the leverage, as we saw with the Taliban in Afghanistan in the past, or as we've been seeing with Hamas. And so the Qataris have built their national sovereignty and doctrine on this shield that the United States provides, and to a lesser extent on building multilateral relations with the Turks and bolstering their ties with the Iranians to try to have their hands in several pots. Now with this airstrike, I think they must be seriously reassessing the fact that their radars didn't function as intended, that the United States did not indeed pick up the Israeli incoming aircraft or missiles, or that maybe the U.S. did pick them up but didn't provide adequate warning. And so that's why we're seeing the mobilization of the Arab and Muslim nations in a way to show the United States that Qatar matters, that Qatar punches above its weight with its vast gas wealth, and that Qatar, should the U.S. choose to favor Israel in this security relationship, that Qatar has other options. Of course, I strongly believe that the Qataris are desperately hoping the U.S. realizes that Qatar and Doha it cannot be sacrificed, and that the United States must rein in Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli establishment to understand that you can go after Hamas's leadership, but under different circumstances and not with this over-the-top show of callous force, as we saw last week.
Ahmed, thanks so much. Brilliant. Ahmed Fouad, Alkhatib, a real pleasure having you on DW. Thank you.
Thank you.
More on this. We're joined now by Gabriel Mitchell, a visiting fellow with the German Marshall Fund in Jerusalem. Gabriel, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio promised unwavering support to Israel. What does that mean for Israel's military actions in Gaza and beyond?
Well, the U.S. administration is in a tough position. It needs to publicly support Israel on the one hand, while also knowing that the American public, both Republican and Democrat, is increasingly reducing its support for the Israeli operation in Gaza. So the U.S. administration knows that it needs to show public support, while at the same time trying to broker some kind of back-channel agreement, which has been disrupted, of course, by Israel's unilateral strike in Doha last week.
Let's talk about that, because Marco Rubio is now heading to Qatar. Leaders at an Arab Islamic summit there just called for Israel to be punished for its strike on Hamas offices in Doha. How can the U.S. maintain its unwavering support for Israel on the one hand, while preserving its key strategic relationships with nations like Qatar on the other?
Well, what's interesting is that yesterday Netanyahu said that this was a unilateral Israeli decision, but at the same time, yesterday, 3 Israeli sources reportedly said that they notified the United States prior to the attack. So it's going to be a difficult time for Rubio visiting Doha, trying to paper over the challenges of what exactly happened last week and what was the order of events. When was the U.S. notified? Didn't have enough time to notify their Qatari peers, and did the Qatari peers have enough time to notify perhaps their partners in Hamas that were operating and negotiating some kind of arrangement to the end of the war in Doha at the same time? So the U.S. has a couple of options on the table. It can obviously address some of them economically and make security guarantees, but obviously an element of this has been disrupted and disturbed given the fact that the largest U.S. base in the region and the Central Command for CENTCOM is located in Qatar. And despite that, the United States greenlit this operation.
Let's look a little more closely at that upcoming meeting. What do you think Qatari leaders will be hoping to achieve in their meetings with Rubio, and how do you expect those meetings to play out?
They're likely to demand security guarantees, promises that this kind of operation isn't going to happen again in the future. Although, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I think that there's going to be a challenge for the United States to essentially make promises that the Qataris or other actors within the Gulf region are going to believe can be promised and executed. But they're also likely going to ask for some kind of economic stimulus, some kind of way of paying for the damage. And they're likely to demand, as they did yesterday, to continue to demand for some kind of immediate end of the war, even if it isn't necessarily under the conditions or the terms that Israel or the United States would like. I don't think that that's necessarily something that the U.S. administration is going to be willing to give into, but at the very least, they'll open their ears.
Now, you mentioned diminishing support in the U.S. for Israel's actions in Gaza. Is the U.S., in your view, becoming increasingly isolated in its support for Israel?
Well, we're just a couple of days in advance of the United Nations General Assembly, and I do anticipate that the U.S. position on this war is going to be an isolated one, and it will likely continue to be an isolated one. On the one hand, the Trump administration doesn't want to reduce its support for Israel. There are very few actors in the international community in which the Trump administration has thrown its full support for. At the same time, President Trump likes winners. And so long as he feels that this war is not reaching a conclusion that is in the best interest of the United States, there always remains and exists a possibility for him to say enough is enough. I don't anticipate that happening over the next couple of days, but it is definitely a possibility in the coming weeks that the Trump administration starts to pivot towards domestic issues.
Gabriel, good talking to you. Gabriel Mitchell with the German Marshall Fund there in Jerusalem.
Thank you.